2003, the Fallout series was going to be releasing a new project that was going to be essentially the third in the mainline series. Made by Black Isle Studios, the project that was pretty much Fallout 3 was codenamed Van Buren and was set to release that year or within 2004, published by the original creators of the franchise, Interplay Entertainment. The story of Van Buren was said to be set within the American Southwest, with the new California Republic being on the eastern border. During this adventure, one individual named the Prisoner would find an opening within the jail they were stuck in and were able to escape, but quickly being attacked by an unknown individual, the Prisoner would escape and start venturing the world to look for answers. Sadly, the nearly finished game was cancelled on the 8th of December 2003 as Titus Software wanted to massively improve Interplay's console division to try and profit from the rise in the new consoles exciting the market. And because of that new focus, Van Buren was shelved and some of the Black Isle team was moved on to making the other Fallout game named Brotherhood of Steel 2, which funnily enough also got cancelled. However, despite all of that, many factions were developed for this game with some backstory, unique features and individuals, and some factions have a bit more lore developed from them from previous games. So who were the forgotten factions from Van Buren? Where were they based? What would the player do when meeting them? And what made them unique? Well, in today's video we will be having a look at the forgotten factions from what was the original Fallout 3 codenamed Van Buren and show off what could have been. For obvious reasons, I will be leaving out the big factions such as the Brotherhood of Steel, Caesar's Legion and the Followers of the Apocalypse, as their lore is pretty in-depth anyway, and it's pretty clear how they would have influenced the world if they were in it. However, if people want, I can always explore that later in a future video. But for now, these are the forgotten factions from the cancelled Fallout 3 game, codenamed Van Buren. The 215 Rail Line Powder Gang was said to play a major part in the overall story of Van Buren, with many developed characters involved with them. After they were cut, however, the Powder Gang's idea was continued on into Fallout New Vegas, most likely because they were too interesting or developed to fully shelf away. Under the leadership of Jackson, this faction was set up by him, as he used to work as a foreman on the 215 rail line, helping the NCR fulfill contracts and with their everyday tasks. One day, however, Dodge, the governor of Hoover Dam, would go on to run out of money, and that would stop paying his workers, leaving Jackson without any contracts to fulfill, or lots of contracts to fulfill, but no money to be collected. Furious by this news, Jackson had enough and took his loyal crew out into the desert, raiding caravans when they found them to gain their resources and luxuries. And the main reason they hit the caravans was because they blamed them for putting them in the position in the first place. As time passed, Jackson would appoint a man only known as Boilermaker, who would wear a welding mask at all times as one of his higher-up members of the gang, and would look at taking the town of Non-Canon through force to grab all of their goods. As the prisoner ventured through the world, they would stop by at Non-Canon and meet the residents, who were terrified for their lives, as they would say an attack was happening soon by these gang members, as they would plead to the prisoner to do something about the situation. 1 week later, the battle would take place as Jackson would show up in metal armor and a Kevlar helmet, carrying a 7.62mm assault rifle, several frag grenades, and a .44 revolver, alongside Boilermaker, who would carry his trusted flamethrower and a hefty baseball bat. Boilermaker in a battle would look for the least heavily armored troops and would go on to beat them to death with his baseball bat. The ones that did have armor, however, would go on to be just burnt alive. Whilst the 215 rail line powder gangers got cut from the game, it's clear to see they had an overall impact on the story, as the New Vegas powder gangers would pick up their story by doing the exact same thing to the residents of Goodsprings, just after they are joined by a mysterious individual only named as the Courier. So in the end, the 215 rail line powder gangers did to some extent make it into the game, just with a few changes to their overall narrative. Another gang out there within the Hoover Dam area would have been the Caravan company known as the Threesome Caravans. This group was run by the three brothers named the Giordano triplets, who were virtually inseparable. Growing up, they were part of the NCR communities but were eventually sent to prison for some petty thefts. After being in prison for a year, the three brothers would use their remaining funds to open up their own caravan company. But despite having a unique name and all the things they needed, the company did not take off well at all, as word got around that the people behind it were ex-criminals. Luckily for them, however, there were still some contracts out there to keep them afloat financially. And it didn't take long before their lucky day came, when their company was recruited to accompany Joseph Dodge to Hoover Dam, carrying supplies to last the journey and to set up shop there. The brothers saw this as a new opportunity, a time for them to start again. Hoover Dam worked like a charm for the brothers, as they were able to do business with many of the lower class individuals living within the area. Whilst the brothers had left behind their illegal ways, many within the area, more specifically Joseph Dodge, believed them to be criminals still and part of the dodgy lower class from the NCR areas. But the Threesome Caravan Company has a smart and confident leader in Enzo, who is honourable, straightforward and willing to deal with anyone or anything as long as it does not involve hurting anyone else. Too much anyway. But although moving to the area has helped them in the long run, it is clear that this trio is being affected by the Crimson Caravan, who have been actively supplying arms and weapons to Joseph Dodge and his NCR troops. Not only that, but the brothers' many caravans are also being raided regularly by the Brotherhood of Steel soldiers, who would use cloaking devices, most likely stealth boys, to hide their presence. The Brotherhood would also hit the Crimson Caravan as well, but they are still able to keep their regular shipping runs, unlike the Threesome brothers. The brothers have become pretty paranoid about their business, and when they come into contact with the prisoner, will ask them to do a job for them, which would consist of the prisoner sneaking into the Crimson Caravan park and spying on them to see what their business practice is and their transaction history, as well as to see who they are working with. With the job being taken up, the prisoner would then go on to decide to join either the Crimson Caravan or the three brothers and their smaller caravan company. Sadly, the three brothers never made it into a Fallout game, most likely because of their very clear resemblance to the three members of the Sopranos, Paulie, Silvio and Tony. However, maybe one day we will run into their caravan business and be able to browse through their items that some may call junk, but to them, will they call them treasures. Whilst the Blackfoot Tribe is known out within Arizona during the events of New Vegas, this Blackfoot Tribe, also from Arizona, had a different story to tell during the development of Van Buren. This group was founded by a military group led by a man known as Captain John Bloch, after they were left stranded after its HQ and transport vehicles were destroyed within the Great War. Now on their own without many resources, the group knew how to manage weaponry but had no clue how to farm or maintain a new life. This forced them into becoming raiders. But during one raid on a small ranching community, there was to be a standoff between the two parties. Eventually a truce was called and the Blackfoot raiders were paid protection money by the ranchers to make sure they never raided them again. As the raiders agreed to this deal, a great relationship was formed and a bright future was to be had for the Blackfoot group, as they can now spend the mass loads of money they had acquired with the ranchers who housed equipment, food and liquor. This boosted the relationship between the two groups as they would both become intermingled over the next decade. Whilst this relationship was blossoming, a wandering group of Native Americans established contact with the gang and the ranchers and joined them as well to strengthen them even further. The tribes through this deal gained access to technology and a fortified home, whereas the raiders and ranchers gained access to skilled outdoorsmen who knew the area and its vegetation well. Sadly for this group, an unexpected great fire hit their original settlement, forcing them all to move out into a new place within a small tourist trap within the hills. There they would go on to raise Brahmin and would go on to raid other communities in the area for livestock and supplies. 20 years into their history, tragedy struck the tribe as they had forgotten the age-old ways to maintain their equipment, which would regularly get covered in dirt. But the worst of the situation was that a sickness had spread throughout their community, wiping out a lot of their young population, meaning their future was looking bleak. This motivated them to do new raids in which they would take the children and teens from other communities to bolster their numbers once more. This would grow into what would be a slaving industry where they would eventually slave for profit. This had morphed them into slave raiders who are massively feared by all in the area. To this date, if the prisoner was to encounter them, this Blackfoot tribe would be extremely fierce in combat, and it would be evident that they are extremely parasitic in nature, stealing from other communities to bolster their own. What was once a nice cooperative tribe has now turned into one that only sees survival no matter the cost. The only way you could maybe get on with this tribe is by either joining their ranks yourself by proving you are worthwhile, or by buying produce from them. It's quite clear that the design of the Blackfoots of Van Buren was the original workings of what would have become the most terrifying faction within New Vegas, Caesar's Legion, but with a few differences, making them just simple slave raiders and not a massive superpower taking over the lands ruled by just one man. Unlike the other two, the Boulder Scientists faction was much smaller, and sadly not much is known about them or what role they would have played in the overall story. Their origin story was said to be linked to one man named Goddard, who was at the time an NCR scientist who was being escorted by a military escort throughout the region. His role was to establish power generators and to make a note of any old world power facilities, which would most likely help the NCR in their expansion and control over the region. Another scientist known as Presper became aware of these reports from Goddard and sent him out again to go and investigate a specific area within America's southwest. After a long journey out there within the southwest, Goddard would return and would be later joined by Presper and a group of soldiers who would hear about a place called the Boulder Dome and would go on to investigate it thoroughly. Getting to it, they would find that it was in need of major repairs, but inside it contained a fully functional and an advanced lab, which also contained a fully functioning Zax unit. Realizing this was a perfect place to set up shop, the scientist and small group of soldiers set up here, and over the next few years, Presper would invite and send a lot of his new student scientists to their new location of the Boulder Dome, as he would try and re-establish a new civilization. Anyone who objected to Presper's new way of thinking would be seen as an enemy and would be put in a cold sleep that was originally developed to aid their once goal of space travel. It's unsure if this faction is a threat to society or not, but what is clear is that the Boulder Scientists hold some of the most advanced technology out there, and in the wrong hands, it could be devastating. Whilst in Van Buren's development, the faction of the NCR and the Brotherhood of Steel were going to be within the game, their war was also going to be continuing and extremely heated at this point. Both these factions, along with what would have been Caesar's Legion, would be fighting on all fronts. However, during the peak of this war, one splinter faction was said to split from the Brotherhood of Steel in 2253 to try and end the war with the NCR once and for all. During this operation, some of the Brotherhood of Steel operatives would start to use stealth boys to try and sneak into the NCR territory and steal their information documents to try and get the upper hand on them. However, as they were going to conduct these operations, it became clear that the stealth boys being used had major side effects on those that used them. These side effects would consist of paranoia, delusions, and schizophrenia, which caused such panic within the ranks of the Brotherhood that stealth boys became illegal and would not be used within their society. And because they now had to deal with this situation within their bases, their war effort fell behind massively. This led to the undercover team to be disbanded completely, with the members of the crew not really knowing why they were being abandoned until the paranoia and schizophrenia started getting worse by the day. This led the disbanded group to become filled with hatred, thinking they had been abandoned by their leaders, and now their new goal was to get into the Brotherhood bases again and to take out their once leaders. This formed the new group named the Circle of Steel, whose goals, apart from taking out their leaders, was also to recover lost technology and rebuild the glory of the Brotherhood at any cost. For the Brotherhood of Steel, this only hinders their war effort even more, as not only have they got the NCR and Caesar's Legion on their doorsteps, they also now have this massively paranoid, angry, and schizophrenia-induced group who just want to see their downfall and steal their technology. With all of that said, the Circle are technically canon and do exist within the Fallout universe, as mentioned by Christine Royce in Dead Money, as she wants to seek revenge on Father Elijah. But what they are up to after this, we will have to wait and see, for their presence in the overall universe has not been shown yet and was cut down massively with Van Buren. Whilst there were many raider groups out within the wasteland, each had their own unique identities aside from killing innocents and stealing their stuff. One group who did make it into the game was the Jackals, who were also meant to be a big raider group within Van Buren. Within this game, however, the Jackals were hit by a massive winter storm, which forced their group to have to eat their own kind to survive. This cannibalistic trait would become their key identity and would make them stand out more compared to other tribes out there. However, on their travels, the Jackals would become ruled by another group who would turn them into their slave tribe, a group that was far more terrifying in nature, that being the group named as the Daughters of Hecate. The leader of this tribe was to be a supposedly insane individual named Hecate. Hecate was originally said to be a part of her own unique tribe. However, one day that tribe became lost to her and left her on her own. With this change, Hecate would braid her hair in the style that the tribe used to do to make her stand out, and after she had adopted that identity, would go on to leave the area in which she was housed, in a place named the Nursery, which was said to be an advanced scientific experiment which was to explore what it was like to bring life back, essentially a real-life Garden of Eden. Whilst in the nursery, Hecate would go on to learn about midwifery as well as herbal medicine, something that was so incredibly rare within the New World. And with this new knowledge, Hecate would go on to meet with all the other tribes who had rejected her in the past and would aid them in her new skills. Doing this would massively help her gain trust with all of these tribes, and as this grew more and more, Hecate would then start preaching about her way of life, her views on death, and her thoughts on rebirth religion. Putting all of this out there, she would go on to ask that all young women of the tribes would go on to join her and help her on her quest to boost the tribes of the wasteland. As many did join her ranks believing all that she had said, it was finalized. The Daughters of Hecate was officially born. As the daughters rose to power, they would go on to decide who could marry and who could not, who was allowed to have children and who was not, and only the daughters were allowed to bring a child into this world. No one else from the tribes was allowed to help someone give birth, especially the men. It had to be in the birthing tent that was set aside from the rest of the tribes. Anyone who disobeyed these rules would be hit with impotence, or their wives would go on to bore sickly children. The same would happen if anyone was to harm a daughter that was assigned to them. Men would be made impotent until assigned with a new daughter, helping the whole daughter system grow in power and infamy. One thing that was hidden from the members, however, was that the daughters would go on to take the best of the children for themselves and substituted them with the weak or informed children to allow them to look like the chosen ones. When growing up, the best of the men would become warriors within their group known as the Hounds of Hecate, and the best of the females would be made into daughters. This allowed the tribe to grow in numbers and become extremely strong, as the rest of the tribes became increasingly weakened as the daughters took their strongest children for themselves. This made Hecate very excited, as she was still mad that she had been rejected from them originally, and now she was about to get her revenge. She now had one plan, and that was to weaken the other tribes so much that she could then send in her hounds to take them all out and leave them non-existent. This would also mean taking on Caesar's legion, who she had also been rejected from. Once all of the enemies had gone, Hecate and her daughters could go back to the nursery and claim it as their just reward. Whilst terrifying in nature, it would most likely be up to the prisoner whether their plan actually works or not. Will they be the most dominant tribe throughout the land, or will they be shut down, allowing the other tribes like the Jackals to thrive on their own? Regardless, the Daughters of Hecate certainly aren't a tribe you want to mess about with, as they seek to weaken you and your community to eventually wipe you off the face of the earth. Coming over from the west would be another tribe that never made the cut that would be named as the Iron Rivers. The Iron Rivers' goal was to reach the area known as the Great Circle, which was essentially the circle junction somewhere within or near Denver. On their travels, they would go on to follow the path of what they called the Great Roaring Machine, which was a pre-war train because they believed that it was a sign of the old world returning. The tribe wasn't always known as the Iron Rivers, however. Before they became a thing, it was said that they were part of a larger tribe that threw them out for unknown reasons. Now on their own, the Iron Rivers are heavily religious, putting their faith into things such as the Chainwalkers and the Mad King Scorpion, which was similar to Native American folklore. Now on their travels, this tribe would go on to collect and use handcarts, turning them into roaming caravans to make their way over the wilderness safely. This group would immediately reject the daughters of Hecate, allowing them to be free from their ultimate goal. However, they have become targets for the cannibalistic vipers. Easy to spot, the Iron Rivers would cover their bodies in tattoos and paintings of parallel lines to reflect their religion that looks at the pre-war trains and their rails. This nomadic tribe would want nothing more but peace, to just travel the world to see where it led them, getting to see the pre-war world come back into existence. However, their mere presence annoys many other tribes, and for Caesar's legion, he sees them as potential slaves and seeks to grab them for his own, seeing them as easy to target nomads who were weak, and because of that, would antagonize them regularly. If they were to be within the game, it's pretty safe to say that this tribe would be pretty welcoming, as all they want to do is go on their great journey, following the old railway networks from the pre-war years. Over in Denver, a group of once NCR prisoners would form together and have links with members of the Powder Gangers. It was said that the reason they were in the NCR prisons was because they all conducted a large raid on the NCR's bank to try and seize their payroll. As the raid was a failure, the group somehow destroyed all of the money and led to the destabilization of the eastern part of the NCR. Their leader was a man named Porter, who would feel bad for the role he played in the downfall of some of the NCR. Whilst a few of the soon-to-be scavengers tried to escape the prison, many would be brought right back as they had nowhere else to go. After 2 years of constant escape attempts and returning back to the prison, the gang was released, but on a scheme labelled as work release, which would allow the NCR to have more room in their prisons and help them have workers to get them supplies from places like Denver. With this, Porter and his men would go on to spend a year travelling dealing with tribes, slavers, raiders and mutants, before finally getting to their destination of Denver. Now with only half of the men they left with, they would go on to set up camp here and scavenge anything they could find from the buildings and laying out tracks to pave the way for the NCR to one day take over the city. This group of blue-collar workers would be just simple labourers, but would put their all into the work they did within Denver, spending 2 years of their life there. They became so dependent on the city at this point that if they were to up and leave to seek out other opportunities, they would have to leave behind everything they had built and spend another 2 to 3 years on the road again, which they did not want to do. But during that time, they were faced with rebels within their group, with these being labelled as traitors, led by Hardin and an ex-raider, Anton, who would want to abandon Denver completely and do anything to leave it. Not only that, but Denver was also being raided by large packs of savage dogs and small groups from Caesar's legion, leaving the scavengers victim to attacks. As the prisoner ventured over the land, they would come into contact with this group of NCR scavengers and most likely try and help them out in their situation. What their ultimate goal is within Denver now is unknown, but considering they are facing violent weather storms, Caesar's legion soldiers, wild dogs and traitors, I think it's fair to say that these once criminals are just simply fighting for their survival to hopefully one day create a functioning Denver once again, to make it, finally, their home. And last but not least, as the prisoner ventures into the area known as the Reservation Trading Post, they might go on to encounter these terrifying individuals known as the Scaven-Pickers, a rogue group of dangerous scavengers led by Kilk. These scavengers are heavily affected by Rad-X and Radaway usage, as well as being heavily exposed to a lot of radiation being located where they are. And because of all of these things, they have gone a bit mad. Wearing a combination of materials as armor, they could wear anything from rubber, leather, metal, and aged human skin as means to protect themselves. Not only that, but most of their language consists of utter gibberish to the everyday person. But when speaking to someone for trade reasons, will occasionally get some words out there that are recognizable. They are simple beings, attacking anyone they don't like the look of, and will go on to follow anyone who wears or carries something they want for themselves, which can include their own skin. For the ghouls in the nearby trading post coast area, they are the ones who named them in the first place and consider them to be an outright nuisance, as they constantly steal from the ghouls, and the ones who aren't criminals only seem to ever want to trade utter junk. Fighting against these Scaven-Pickers isn't easy, however, as they are said to be some of the most skilled warriors within the area, with their main fighting skill being in unarmed combat, something they can teach to those who respect them and help them out with tasks. Whilst it is unknown where the Scaven-Pickers came from originally, it is rumoured that they are actually just escaped slaves, most likely from Caesar's legion, who found their freedom when entering the reservation trading post. It is said that when the prisoner enters this area, they would run into other escaped slaves who had been adopted by the formed Scaven-Pickers. Whilst they are a deadly group, the Scaven-Pickers, they are really just heavily irradiated humans who are just a bit paranoid due to the amount of radiation they have taken on. They can be civil, however, and as mentioned, will teach those they like the ways of unarmed combat. What their story was going to be, however, is completely unknown. But for the ghouls in the area, they would probably like it if these mad individuals who speak utter gibberish and trade useless junk were gone from the area forever. Whilst these were the factions of Van Buren that never saw the light of day, there were many other faction storylines that also didn't make it, from such factions as the Rights, the Vipers, the Twisted Hares, the Followers of the Apocalypse, and even the big guns such as the Brotherhood of Steel, the NCR, and Caesar's Legion. What the overall storyline of the Van Buren project was is not really known, and how all of these factions played a part is really quite interesting to think about. However, with that said, it's quite clear that a lot of these ideas that went into these factions didn't get completely ignored. A lot of these factions have clear links into what made a lot of characters within New Vegas, for example. Maybe the reason why a lot of these ideas went into New Vegas was because they had already been somewhat developed, and that saved on writing time, or maybe some of the original writers of these factions went on to be the main writers on New Vegas and wanted to bring their ideas into it again. Who honestly knows? But as I say, a lot of them within Van Buren are seen a little bit within New Vegas and some of Fallout 3. Will we ever get to explore some of these factions again, such as the Daughters of Hecate, or are they just ideas that are just that, ideas? We will have to wait and see. But I always find that exploring the lore of Van Buren project is very interesting, and it's nice to get a sight into where the Fallout series could have gone. And in future videos, we will be exploring more of this forgotten universe. But for now, this has been the story behind the lost factions of Fallout. These have been the forgotten factions of Van Buren. I want to say a big thank you for watching this video. Do let me know if you'd like to see more videos on this cancelled Fallout game, as some of the ideas behind it are very interesting indeed. A huge thank you to my patrons as well for allowing me to make these videos on a regular basis, including my small fishes, my big fishes Christopher, Last Persona User, Arto Krem, Greg, and Anthony, my YouTube channel Wise Ones, Fiery Italian, Ico the Wolf, and Sith Lord 906, my sharks, Wow Such Gaming, Jason X117, Breadbeard, and Rondacy, and my Megalodons, Sinus, Hazy Thoughts, and Chernobyl Stalker. But that is all for now. Thank you for watching again, and if you want more lore videos, check out my playlists below. Use my G Fuel link and code WiseFishYT for up to 30% off your orders. And please do like, comment, and subscribe to help get these videos out there. And with all of that said, I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.